Hey, hello everybody. This is John Marcotte from Heroic Girls, and this is the very first one of these we're doing. We're doing interviews with women that are kind of working in the geek culture space and talking about female empowerment. And I'm really happy to talk about my first guest that we've ever had. You may know her from her appearances on Mythbusters, Mythbusters Junior, and Sci-Jinx on the Discovery Channel. You may know her from her numerous panels on superhero science at comic book conventions around the country, or her awesome cosplays. Uh, and her latest project is a podcast that goes behind the scene and talks to female makers. It's called Tinkering Bells, so find that wherever you find your podcast at. Please welcome my friend and sometimes co-panelist, Tamara Robertson.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I appreciate it. And I wanted to just start out with, people know you as a television host, a speaker, a podcaster, I guess now, but they may not know about your actual engineering background. I did not know about your engineering background until I went looking for this interview. So you have some serious cred. Could you talk a little bit about what your history is in engineering?
Yeah, so I actually started out as a chemical and biomolecular engineer in corporate America. My very first internship as an engineer was with a plastics additives company, where I actually got a patent that is now in 90% of the clarified polypropylene market. So if you've got Rubbermaid, Tupperware, all of that's probably in there. And then I graduated out and actually went straight into the vaccines world. So I helped a greenfield startup. I came a week after groundbreaking, and we designed and built a global vaccines company right in North Carolina. Wow. Fun fact was that we were doing that as the swine flu pandemic happened. So I actually got to get flown to Europe and make swine flu vaccine for the pandemic. And then I came back and I started working with the World Health Organization and CDC on the first avian flu vaccine. Right. And something that has led to a lot of discussions as we've been living in the COVID world that we are living in. Right. And then, after that, I went on, I've done a lot of work with Fortune 500 companies, designing and building both facilities and products. My last corporate job, I was actually a global executive reporting into the CEO for a fluorination company. Right. And it was at that point that I turned around and be like, I made it. Let me bring up the next tier of women. And I realized that for 5 tiers of management, there were no other women. And so in 2015, I came out of full-time corporate engineering and went into full-time outreach, and now part-time consulting. I still do a large amount of facility remediations and builds here in the Los Angeles area. But that's what I call my hobby now, because my mission in life is to get more little girls excited and interested in going into engineering. So
now that is awesome. One thing that I read when I was kind of doing my research here that I thought was interesting is that you never even considered the possibility of being an engineer until your sophomore year of college, when a professor said, you're really good at this, you should be an engineer. Could you talk a little bit about why it may not have occurred to someone who has obviously got as much interest and passion and ability as you did? Why didn't engineering occur to you until all the way when you were 20?
So it's really interesting. So I grew up in a very small town in the Southeast, and I did not know any real engineers. I definitely didn't know any women real engineers. The only engineer that I actually knew was Scotty from Star Trek. And to be honest, I only saw him on VHS recordings that my dad would bring home when he wasn't deployed. And so I think it's one of those things that I grew up in an era that, we didn't have internet in the home back in the day. And even once internet became a thing, my family couldn't afford to have internet in the home. We didn't have cable in the home. So there was really no exposure to what an engineer was available to me. So I had grown up rebuilding engines and working on homes with my dad and tinkering all the time, but I had no idea that what I really enjoyed doing was something that could be a career until I was in college. And like you said, I had a professor sit me down, because I think at the time I was a history major, and I think I had 8 minors just because I was, as always, bored in school and not challenged. And she's like, your math and science skills are off the charts. Your grades are great. Why are you not looking at engineering? And I literally looked at her and laughed and I said, girls don't do that. which she, of course, did not enjoy because she was a female engineer turned educator. So it was one of those moments that, she signed me up for this field trip to go to NC State, go Wolfpack, and check out some of the pre-engineering programs there. And I sat in a material science class and I felt challenged and engaged for the first time ever. And I just never looked back. But had it not been for her, I would probably, I don't know, probably still just be the lawyer that I was planning on being for the military. So.
The world has enough lawyers. They need more female engineers. So
they do. They need a lot more.
So it was kind of a bit of a coincidence right there in 2015 when you were making that pivot and saying, hey, I've gotten up into management in engineering, not really doing hands-on stuff, but in a high position in the company. I want to go do this outreach to girls. It was the same time that they were looking for new Mythbusters, and they were auditioning for candidates for Mythbusters Search, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where so could you talk a little bit? You joined Mythbusters with the idea of reaching out to little girls and showing them that this was something they could do. Could you talk a little bit about why you think that's important for little girls to be able to look out and see that a girl's a Mythbuster as well?
Yeah, I think that it's one of those things, like when I signed up for the Mythbusters Search, it was one of those things as an engineer and as a human, I'm like, okay, if I don't go for this, even if this is a prank, I'm going to regret it the rest of my life. And so then once I got to the point that I was actually going to the show, I was like, this is a chance for me to showcase to little girls everywhere that women can hold their own in a shop environment, that we are just as capable as our male counterparts at building, at designing, at doing all this. And it was something that, Carrie Byron for me was that woman when I was going through engineering school and I finally had cable and was able to binge and catch up on everything that was Mythbusters. She was always there, not as in any way a token woman, but as an equal partner to her male counterparts. And to me, that was something that was so riveting and defining of what I thought I looked like in a shop and what I thought that more women could look like in a shop if they were told that it was okay, which, we shouldn't need permission. But at the end of the day, if you don't see it, you don't know that it's something you're able to be or allowed to be, right? And so once I realized that they were rebooting the show, I knew that Carrie to me defined my ability and gave me that strength to walk into a shop that I wasn't looked at as an equal and that I was looked down upon and be like, no, I deserve to be here. And so I knew that if she wasn't going to be there on television doing that, someone had to be. And so I was just excited to be potentially that person for the show. And when I showed up and there were two other women, I was very excited about that, though I still to this day wish that there had been more diversity within the 3 women of the 10 candidates that they allowed to be there. But I think it was something that I felt was very important to just continue to be who I was on a platform where kids would actually see it and little girls would be inspired. What's been interesting to me, though, is that when I did it, my mission was to inspire little girls. But I've had so many moms and dads come up to me and talk to me about the impact it had on their sons to see a woman hauling steel and welding and climbing up anything to start building. And it's something that opened my mind a little bit more of the realization that, we're not going to make the change only by inspiring the girls, but also we need to normalize it for the boys to see as well, because at the end of the day, girls are going to go up against girls and boys when it comes to being accepted in those environments.
You and I are simpatico. I'm telling you, we are right on the same track with that. So, yeah, and it occurs to me that if Mythbusters had been on, 10 years earlier, you might have become an engineer a lot sooner. If you had seen Carrie Byron, when you were in 8th grade or a little bit earlier, your whole trajectory might have been sped up a little bit. You might have.
I still wouldn't have had cable though, and that's something that bothers me a lot because we still have like 25% of the nation that doesn't have internet and cable in the home, and it's like how do you make sure that those kids see something beyond their front yard of what they're able to be?
Right. So what misconceptions do you think that girls have about science and engineering, STEM fields that you think holds them back from even trying? What do you think the core things are that stop girls from pursuing an interest? Because when you talk to little kids, they all have that interest, girls and boys. And then at some point it gets kind of driven out of girls. And what do you think is happening there?
I think it's a combination of things. I think that there's this perception that math and science are really hard. And yes, they get challenging, but they're equally challenging for both genders. And I think, or for all genders actually at this, at this stage. So I think it's something that we don't, we, this is really hard. So we teach little boys to be tenacious. We teach them to go for it and fight for it and get better and get dirty and get your hands into it and figure it out and don't give up. But we're a little bit less pushing when it comes to our girls. My dad didn't have a son, so I got that tenacious push, right? Like I was the one that was in there in the shop doing all that. But it's something that girls don't always get. They're taught to be dainty and to be pleasing and to help others and to basically not create a ruckus. And you have to create a ruckus. You have to destabilize the environment and push beyond it. And I think little girls, we're not enabling them to know that it's okay if it's hard and it's going to be hard, but you're going to just keep going and to be tenacious. And then on top of it too, there's still a little bit of that perspective that like, this is a boy thing, like if girls are in a shop, there's going to be a point where they're going to mention liking to build and someone's going to be like, well, that's a boy thing. Why are you doing that? Like the best thing my dad did for me was he never told me building was a boy or a girl thing. It was just something we did for fun. And that was great until I hit school. And then I had to become a closeted builder because suddenly I was being told all the time that I was trying to be a boy because I liked sports, because I liked building. And so teaching girls and kids in general that who they are is who they are and that there's no gender to any of this, that it's an exciting thing. I think the other thing too is connecting it to where they're at, because boys are more likely to be outside and be getting dirty and all of that. It's easy for them to then connect to like the biosciences and stuff. But like connecting cosmetics to chemistry and chemical engineering for girls, or connecting whatever they're into. If they're into high heels, talking about design, like you can talk to a boy or a girl about car design just like you could talk to them about heel design,
Right.
And I think just rocking that perspective for them that there is no gender, getting rid of that. And then also, again, just teaching them that, yeah, it's hard. It's going to be hard. Everything in life is hard if it's worth it. So you just keep trying. And not everyone is going to be able to get it the first time without failing. I think that's another thing. Little girls are really, I think they're pushed to be more perfect. So failure isn't always an option for them. And that's not fair because failure has to be an option in science. You have to fail or you're not going to innovate. You're not going to iterate. You're not going to move forward. And like I jokingly tell kids all the time, if we keep being afraid to fail, the robots are going to take over because AI's entire being is about fail, try, and evolve. So I think we have to teach little girls that everyone fails. We all fall down, but we all get back up. And that's the important part. That's that tenacity that they need, just like the little boys need it.
Right. One of the things that, one of the ways you reach out to kids that I have seen and I love because it's one of my favorite panels at any comic book convention is superhero science panels. I love those. I'm sure that is where I saw you first. Could you talk to me a little bit about superhero science, what it is, how you use that, and why you use it maybe, just tell me a little bit about superhero science. I love that.
Yeah, so superheroes are my absolute jam. Like between their powers and their tech, there's so much inspiration and so much science connectivity. It's one of those things that if you go to a 5-year-old and you're like, here's Einstein, he's a scientist, isn't he cool? They're gonna be like, he's got weird hair. But if you're like, hey, here's the Hulk, and the Hulk is Dr. Bruce Banner, and Dr. Bruce Banner has multiple PhDs all in science. Isn't science cool? They're gonna be like, whoa, yes, the Hulk's a scientist. I want to be one. Or you connect to them that Batman and Tony Stark are just men who have utilized engineering to be superheroes. So really, anyone can be a superhero at the end of the day, right? And Batgirl, she also uses tech. So it's one of those things that superheroes to me are just an easy way to come to kids where they're already at and get them excited about a new subject that's connected to something that they're already like amped about. But in addition to that, I have a science outreach comic called Seekers of Science. And the whole reason I decided that a comic was the way I wanted to reach more kids, in addition to the panels that I was doing across the nation, is that comics are naturally inclusive. They're naturally diverse. They're naturally available. I was able to get comics at free comic book days, all across the city when I wasn't able to actually afford comics. So I was able to be inspired by X-Men before I could ever afford to be inspired by X-Men. And I think that ability to showcase that anyone is able to make a difference, is able to help others, is able to utilize science and engineering to create cool world-saving, people-saving tech is just a synergistic approach. And of course, I love cosplay. I love wardrobe. I do wardrobe design here in Hollywood. So it's like one of those things that like getting to design them as well. Now I get to like put the cosplay on and inspire the kids. And who doesn't want Halloween every day of the year if you get to be a superhero, right?
Yeah. Now, speaking of comic books, we have a mutual friend, Jeremy Whitley, who he has his great creator-owned book, Princeless. Love that book. But the one I wanted to talk about, because I think it's more germane to what we're discussing, is The Unstoppable Wasp. Nadia Pym, one of my favorite books of like the past 5 or 6 years. It's sporadically published. She doesn't get as much continuing coverage as I would like. But Nadia is a young female scientist, and she's that first. That's primarily what she is. And then on top of it, she's a superhero on the side. She even founded an organization to uplift girl scientists in the Marvel universe. You can be an agent of girl, and I remember its geniuses, and if I was more of a genius, I'd remember what the rest of the letters stand for, but an agent of girl. And so there were 2 things I wanted to talk about here. And the first is, I have seen your Unstoppable Wasp Nadia Pym cosplay, and it's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen on the planet. I will do my best to either find a clip to insert here or to link to it afterwards, because it is just awesome. And then the other thing was, I think that's a good example of using media in a positive way to reach out to girls. Are there other books or comic books that you think do a good job of showcasing young female scientists or girls, giving them that kind of that confidence boost or that empowerment, showing them what's possible for girls to accomplish?
Yeah, Jeremy does such a phenomenal job with all of the things that he publishes, making them inclusive, diverse, making sure that he's uplifting, the society members that aren't always getting a voice. And I love what he does. The whole reason that I made that cosplay actually was because in each issue of Unstoppable Wasp, he uplifts a real living scientist. And so he actually interviewed me for an issue. And then he's the one that connected me with Marvel to do my first, superhero science demo table at an event. And so to kind of be a nod to him and a thanks to him, the next event that we had a table next to each other at, I made sure that I had built my Nadia Pym cosplay and I showed up in it. I think that any of his literature, honestly, is amazing for uplifting girls. I love Princeless. It's so good. Where else is a princess taught to save herself? I tell little girls all the time, it's fine if you want to be a princess, just build your own castles, And it's also, I think, I always go back to X-Men. X-Men was my first ever favorite comic. And it's one of those things that there are so many powerhouse women in the X-Men family. Like, I'm actually kind of surprised. Well, I know the backstory of why we haven't gotten more X-Men movies. But when we started seeing Wonder Woman and the Black Widow and all of this stuff started to come out, I'm like, where's the Storm movie? And now we've got the Dark Phoenix movie, which has been great. But I think those are always really good. As far as I also love She-Ra on Netflix. I know it's not really like a comic, but the Netflix, it is a comic, but also the Netflix cartoon version has done such a great job of uplifting women. There's so many amazing tinkerers on that show, and I keep glancing at my TV like it's going to suddenly be on there. But I just love that's my go-to. If I'm having a bad day, I just put She-Ra on and it brightens my life. So I think any of those would be a great selection of things to go and read and look at.
So this whole idea of inspiring girls, inspiring women, put me in the mind of in the early 2000s. They at first it was kind of a joke. It was anecdotal. They identified something called the Scully effect, and it's one of my favorite stories that showed kind of the power of pop culture. And that was the show The X-Files was incredibly popular. And shortly after The X-Files had been out for a little bit, colleges started reporting that more women were entering medical professions, STEM careers as scientists, and law enforcement careers. and they surveyed them. And for a while, again, it was anecdotal, but we actually have data now. The Gina Davis Institute for Study of Women in Media actually surveyed women in STEM careers. They oversampled that population, said, was Dana Scully a reason that you decided to become a scientist or get involved in law enforcement? And the overwhelming answer was yes, that they remembered watching that show and going, that's something I can do. So who do you think are the Dana Scullys of today? Do you think there are shows or people out there right now that girls could look up to and say, oh, something's possible that I didn't know was possible. This is who I should be looking at, and they're giving me that like, kind of kick in the right direction?
I think that there's so many incredible women as far as characters are concerned in the media now. You know, media's gotten a lot better about putting women in these roles, whether it's detective roles or it's STEM roles. I think there's also a lot of really great work going around, like amplifying women that are actually in these roles. So like Miranda Cosgrove is running a show, and they're really great about like amplifying these are some women scientists here. Let's talk to them. Let's hear from them. I think that as far as living women as in lead roles that are actually engineers or scientists, there's not as many on television that aren't character driven. And that's something that's really hard to see. Especially as, you know, as a female engineer, as someone that's hosted, you know, more often than not, I'll be approached to be part of an ensemble cast, but never as a lead. There's never been a woman-centric, like, driven show. Now you're seeing Netflix start to be really great. Like, there's Emily's Wonder Lab is amazing. Emily got to actually like go and like lead a show, and to me that was that moment that I'm like, yes, there she is. Like, and it was on an actual mainstream platform. You see a lot of women-led shows on PBS, but you don't see a lot of these major networks putting money behind it. So I'm really hoping that like Emily gets a season 2, because that show is doing incredible things for little girls to be able to see that. You know, it's doing for girls what Bill Nye did for boys, right? And I think my hope is that you see more of it, but you know, there's a lot of the major networks that are getting hits because they're not having women in their shows at all, let alone as actual leads. And it's really a travesty because, you know, people keep asking, why aren't there more women in STEM? Why aren't there more women in STEM? But the truth is we're there. We're just still hidden figures. And I remember I did a panel for Fox when Hidden Figures came out in New York, and I had someone comment, oh, it's so great that it's not like that anymore. And I laughed and I said, for the men, but it's still that way for us. Like the whole comments of like, tell your wives you're not coming home tonight. And her realization that she was still going to have to go home at some point and do the laundry and clean the house and get the kids ready for school the next day, on top of getting men off the planet. Like, that is still a reality. And those women that are doing that are fighting every day to be in those environments and to thrive, don't also have time to fight for media attention. And so until the media starts recognizing that women can be experts, and they already are experts in this role, and start spotlighting them, these women, we don't have time to fight for that attention and have a career and have a family and be like, hey, media, look at me, you know, like, and that's, I think, a real travesty that we're not seeing more of these science, like, you know, all of them, Nat Geo, history, discovery, science, all of them lending and reaching out for more female experts, because they're there. We have to stop pretending like they're not. And we have to start recognizing them as the experts that they are.
Yeah. And it's kind of frustrating is, you know, women keep having to reprove themselves. You know, you have something like Wonder Woman comes out and is a massive hit, and it was the first one and finally said, okay, now they know female superheroes work, because if you read some of the leaked Sony memos, you know, there were people in the superhero industry that didn't think female-led movies would work. But we haven't hit the point where the past success is an indicator of future success, and people are willing to bet on women the way that they'll, you know, men can fail 4 or 5 times in a row and they will be given opportunity after opportunity. Whereas if a female project fails, it's immediately chalked up to gender, and then it's over, at least for a while. So I cross my fingers every time you get a major, like, female, for me, superhero movie or something like that. I'm like, oh, please be good, because if it's not, we won't see another Wonder Woman movie for 25 years. You know, that we had I think 7 Batman movies before we got one Wonder Woman movie. So
Yeah. And it is something, I just actually talked to this young founder, Danielle Boyer. She founded the STEAM Connection.
mhm.
And she's not only a female in-school engineer who is trying to get a robot into every single kid's hands, but she's also Indigenous. So she gets hit on quite a few areas of these, societal doubts. And one of the things we talked about is that the main pushback that she gets when she walks into a shop is from older engineers, and whether it's male or female, but they're constantly like, do you know this? Oh, you know it? Well, here's 7 questions. And she did comment. She's like, my male peers aren't getting asked the 7 questions. They are getting the same, like, hey, be safe, and this is how you properly use this tool, which you should, as an expert, maker, always impart safety protocols and expert tips
Right.
to the noobs. But at the same time, like, it's the follow-up questions where she's like, yeah, no, I know 3D printing. And then they're like, well, do you know this, and this? And it's not a fair challenge because you don't see your male counterparts. And as an engineer, I don't see my male counterparts dealing with the same 20 questions every time they walk into a room that I have to deal with, even though I'm in executive positions. And it's just not a normalized thing that we should continue. It's something that we need to disrupt as a pattern.
That's why I feel so lucky to be in the comic book fandom, because we don't have that problem at all in comic books. There's no gatekeeping happening here. It's not like every time a woman wears a superhero shirt, they get a quiz to see if they've read every single issue back to 1966.
No, that never happens.
No, it never happens. And guys get that all the time. It's not like a guy could just buy a shirt at Target, wear it, and nobody says anything. It's for everybody.
Yeah, that's what I love about Comic-Con. We're all equally questioned. Are you a fan? Are you a real fan, though?
Yeah, real fan. Well, did you see this? Did you read this?
Yeah, did you read these?
So I think we've kind of laid the thing that the media landscape isn't as equal and inviting as we really want it to be for girls. So do you have any advice for parents of girls that are bringing up girls now? How do you overcome this, inherent kind of societal bias against females in STEM careers? They're not seeing it necessarily reflected in the media the way that they should. They're not always told about the females that have succeeded. They're the real life heroes. What can parents do to kind of overcome that and get girls engaged in STEM?
There's a couple different things. Like, I would say, look in different media, look at YouTube, look at, streaming television, look in books, look in comics, look everywhere, because there's probably someone somewhere that you can start to connect those dots for your daughters and your sons with, as well as, if there's not, creating your own stories. That is why Jeremy does what Jeremy does. Like, he told me, he's like, I was a lover of comics, but there weren't ones that I wanted, that I could share with my little girls. And so I started writing what I wanted them to be able to read and to see and to be empowered by. So there's always that opportunity to also create your own stuff or to partner with companies that are. There's a lot of really great organizations out there. Society of Women Engineers, for instance, has a great mentorship program. So if you have girls that are showing an inclination towards science, mathematics, any of the STEM fields at a young age, reach out to those types of organizations, because the biggest thing they're going to give is a community for your daughters. And at the end of the day, if you have that community, you can deal with all the naysayers and haters of the world, because you know what? It's not just going to be the boys that are doing it. It's going to be the girls too. So try to find media. If it's not there, think about creating it. Think about someone that maybe is an indie artist that's creating. There's so many incredible indie artists that are making comics, that are making art, that are making books, where you can find it. YouTube, again, they're making films and shows. But then make sure that you start reaching out to organizations that naturally are setting up these free networks, so that when they start to try to move beyond it, they have the toolbox that they need to be able to thrive and honestly survive some of the circumstances they're going to come into.
So, I just want to point out that for anybody who thinks that there is some sort of gender component to engineering and making and stuff like that, I want to show everyone to look at how you are lit compared to how I am lit, because one of us has an engineering background and looks real good, and one of us got a couple of lights off of Amazon and it ain't working out so well. So I think we can see that there is not a strong gender component to the ability to do this kind of thing. So, I kind of want to wind up with, we've set the landscape and everything. And what do you think science and engineering is missing out on by not having more women and girls involved? I mean, we've talked about what girls are missing out on, but what's the actual industry? What is science losing out on by not having female involvement?
So I think, you gave this perfect example when you sent this about car seats and how cars are designed for, male crash test dummies. And so you get these different impact ratings based on someone that's much larger. So for instance, when the Ford Focus first came out and my best friend got one in college, I could sit in the passenger seat and the weight thing never turned on because
Right.
I was below 100 pounds. And so they assumed I was a child. And so it's one of those things that technology itself isn't being fully designed to reflect society as a whole. There is very few work clothing that I can actually purchase and wear without having to completely deconstruct and reconstruct for safety reasons. So for instance, I worked in vaccines. There are no bunny suits that fit me correctly. They are all too long, too wide, and they catch. When you're carrying a tray of infectious materials, getting your garment caught on a metal handle, not the best situation.
No.
When you're running a welder and you can't actually move your body because everything is so baggy that it's going to fall and no longer protect the parts of you it needs to protect, there's an issue. Like safety gear is not made for women. Safety boots, not made for women. Like there is so many instances where not only are we keeping women out of these STEM fields because of the bullying and the lack of acceptance, but also from a safety perspective, once they get in, we're not protecting them correctly with the gear. So there's just so many opportunities. One, we're losing the mindsets, we're losing the creative flexibility. There's a ton of studies that have shown that women are better at multitasking because we've always had to be able to multitask family and whatever else we're doing. We're better, as caretakers, we're supposed to be higher rated. These are all things that are going to come into product design. They're going to come into teamwork environments. There's the personality aspect, there's the design aspect, there's the long-term product purchasing aspect, right? If you're only marketing and making something for the males, but the females at home being the biggest buyer, you're also losing out on the money. And we saw that with Wonder Woman, right? Like how it made so much money at the box office. We showed that as women, we show up, and that's something that I think overall, like companies need to start realizing that not only is our voice at the executive board important, but our voice in the engineering labs and the tech centers and all of the aspects of designing, making, marketing, and launching products is vital.
All right. So I want to end actually kind of by setting gender to the side just for 1 second. And I just want to talk about STEM and science. If more people, men and women, understood science, technology, engineering, and math, would the world be a better place? What are we losing out on by having a little bit of, I think there's a bit of an anti-science bias in the United States right now. So uh, what are we missing out on by having that kind of prejudice against sciences? People seem to think it's too hard, don't want to get involved. I don't want to know about that.
Yeah, so that prejudice that we have as a nation is what's going to hold us back. And it's something that it's not just a who is at the table, but if we're even coming to the table. We as a nation used to be a leader in science and technology. And now, for the most part, those that are starting to lead within our nation are people that have come from other countries and have immigrated here and are bringing their still love of and passion of science and tech. We are just turning our backs on something that we used to be, the pillar of for society. And I think in the long run, that could really hurt us because nations that are industrializing and coming up are going to continue to be evolving. But it's kind of like we got to this point of evolution. We're like, okay, we're going to just stagnate. Like, my favorite example right now is SpaceX, right? Like if Elon had decided to go to any other country than ours, we would not be leading in reusability of space technology. And that is a huge thing that I think people should be more awake to because they're all like, oh, SpaceX is doing so great and they're doing so great. We defunded space. As a nation, we decided to defund and not put our tax dollars to space. And the only reason that we are innovating there is because someone came from another country and decided to start their company in our country. And thank you, Elon, because I feel like space should be something we should have never defunded. And I'm happy you privatized it and took all of the risk for like 6 years before you finally got a contract to help the burden. But that is something that I think we have to wake up to, especially as a nation. You know, we cannot just keep being like, this is too hard. This is, you know, this is something I don't believe in, because believe it or not, science still exists and everyone else is embracing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to get to the world where The Martian, the movie The Martian, is a real thing. I love that movie. That's one of my favorite hard science movies. Matt Damon growing poop potatoes on Mars. Everybody, that should be required watching in schools and stuff. That'll get kids into science. Tamara, I appreciate so much you taking your time out. I know you're a very busy person. You got TV shows and all sorts of other things going on. If people want to find you and follow you, where can they find you, and what should they be following right now?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, everything else as at the real Tamara Robertson. I have a link tree on my Instagram that'll take you everywhere. On Twitter, I am TLNR85. But the big things to look out for are, you know, we have Seekers of Science, our outreach comic. We just launched issue 1 in Spanish. We've gone bilingual. We're very excited. We have donated over 150,000 copies across the nation in the last year, and we are not stopping. And then the Tinkering Bells podcast can be found everywhere that podcasts are. That's Tinkering Bells, as in the Southern Belle, not the item. And I put out that bi-weekly. So episode 2 just dropped, and there is more coming.
All right, Tamara Robertson, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that soon we will be able to meet at a con again, do a panel again. I'm fully vaccinated, but I still wear my mask because I don't want people to think that I'm one of the people that isn't vaccinated, and I want to send a message out. But we're getting closer to being normal, and I'm hoping that maybe in the next year or so we'll be able to do that. Thank you very much, Tamara. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.